with friends and my relatives that were really into the scene. 79, 80 hip hop hit for me. Heard Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang and was amazed. I convinced my mom to buy me the record, and against her better judgment, she bought it for me. She thought that it wasn't. She was like, "That's not the right song. The real song is Good Times by Chic. You don't know nothing about Niles Rodgers, you know what I mean?" But in actuality, I didn't. I was just, going along with what all my friends in my school was doing, which was listening to this record and then changing the words to make it fit their situation. So I guess that was the beginnings of the trainings in rap, or whatever that I started to receive. But really liked this song. That song led to anything that I could get my hands on and had rap in it. And then a friend of mine in 1981 moved from the Bronx to Chicago. And he lived 3 doors down from me. His name was David. And he used to have all these crazy, incredible stories about uh, gangs in New York that would fight, but would fight by dancing and stuff like that. And I was just like, what? Like, Chicago was like infested with gangs, so I couldn't fathom that. That didn't make sense to me. But he was telling me about, like, the graffiti artists and all that. And, it sounded good, but I once again still didn't know what that looked like. And he had a bunch of photo, what do you call those, photo albums. He had like about 5 photo albums full of paintings on trains that I was just amazed and loved to go to his house. You're like, let me see those photo albums, man, and just like look at them, trip out on the fact that you can do these things with spray paint. I was pencils and pens and markers and color pencils and things. And when I saw that, it kind of changed the way I thought about stuff. I wanted to try it. So, it went from model cars and model airplane tester cans when you spray them after you make them, you know what I'm saying? And me taking like canvas boards and trying to do paintings on it to my friend Dave knowing some guys on the north side of Chicago who were actual graffiti writers. So he eventually took me to this boys club called the Union Boys Club, so north side of Chicago. And I met a few dudes that I was just really amazed and inspired by. And that day I became a member of the boys club because I wanted to come up there all the time and hang out with these guys. But in doing that, they started to slowly show me the ways of the graffiti artists, the unspoken things like it's not about who you are, like your visual face, like people recognizing you on the street. It's about what you left behind and the beauty that you left behind and having people talk about that. And, just all these little things that I adapted because I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm like part of a little club, little clique. But that eventually got me to absorb the other aspects of hip hop because it wasn't all like put together at the time. Rap, breakdancing eventually infiltrated the Chicago scene. DJing was always there, and I was this little painter who dabbled with poetry every once in a while. It wasn't until I had a crush on this girl named Tasha. I'm gonna tell y'all this crazy story real quick. These 2 dudes in my neighborhood were the first dudes to try their hand at rap, and they were like, it was clowning, like talk about you kind of rap. Your hat is big, your shoes, that kind of thing. And so I was like really afraid to talk to this girl, afraid, but I loved her so much. I just be like, oh my God. She was there under my building one night in the summer, and they were out there drinking beers and stuff, and they started doing this rap thing. Well, I come, the little clumsy kid, skinny, tall guy, and they started to talk about me in their raps, and it was getting laughs. So it got embarrassing and more embarrassing in front of these girls, and I just got so mad. I was like, I left. Went home, I was embarrassed, and I didn't know what to do, so I got a piece of paper, and I just wrote what I thought was the best rap I could write, and I filled up both pages, and I memorized it. And I waited for a few days, actually about a week later, and that exact same circumstance came up. The girl that I liked and her sister was out there. These guys were out there. They saw me, start talking crazy again with their raps. I'm like, all right, cool, keep going. I was like, can I try? Like, yeah, you can't rap. I was like, yes, I can. You try. And so I spit out this rap that I wrote. 2 pages. I wish I could remember that rap to this day. But what was cool was I started getting the applause and stuff, like, certain lines I'd say, people like, oh, oh. It was like about 15 people out there. And I got the fever, I think, that day. I was like, oh, I can actually do this. This is cool. So, but I would do it in secret for years later, up until like 1985, 86, moved to Los Angeles. When I moved to Los Angeles, I went to a school that was full of a lot of people who became somebody later, like actors and singers and things like that. I didn't know that's what they were at the time. But later, the school was full of a lot of different people. I met the Black Eyed Peas, those days. I met, wow, so many different people. A couple of guys who would eventually be Cypress Hill, and all these different things like that. So it was cool to be in an environment that basically did hip hop. Like lunchtime was cool at that school. You know what I'm saying? Dudes would rap and beatbox and showing each other graffiti, and it was just crazy, right? So I got a little bit more serious about the rap thing during lunchtime, hanging out with these guys, and but I still wasn't like, that's what it is. I'm gonna be a rapper. It was more like, that's that graffiti dude who could rap. It wasn't until, wow, I want to say like 1990, 91. We were well into, I had a friend named Cut Chemist, who actually moves with Fat, who eventually was the DJ, one of the DJs for Jurassic 5. We used to go over his house and make tapes, just play around and stuff. We didn't get serious until another guy of ours, his name was Dr. Muhammad. He used to work for Loud Records and Interscope at the time. And so a lot of people knew him in the record industry for being a mixtape operator. Dude would call up radio stations and break new records. Like, dude, you want to play this record? You know you want to play this record? So a label called him because they had heard one of our demos. And they liked the song and they wanted to put it out. So we all had like, oh wow, let's do it. So they asked us, did we have a name? And we didn't have a name. And my son's mother at the time was like, let me hear the song. And I played it to her. And it was like really old school oriented, like Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5 type of stuff. She was like, you guys think you sound like the Furious 5, but you sound more like the Jurassic 5. I started laughing. She wanted to throw us. So I told the brothers, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. I love hearing people's like how they got into hip hop story, because I feel like there's always a moment. I think this is if you are a hip hop head, you have that moment where you get burnt at some point, right? You get roasted in the cypher, and you're like, oh, I got it, and you don't get it, and then the moment for you is when you leave. If you get pissed and leave and you're like, nah, I'm not trying to lose, and then you come back, that's when you are in it for life, I think, at that point, because you get addicted to it. If you're like, oh, I get upset and I'm not going to do it now, then it's not for you. But I love hearing people's stories because I feel like we all have that moment, right? That moment where you're like, oh, I was in a cypher and I thought I was something and I got roasted. And then I was like, oh, but I'm going to come back now. And then, you've been able to accomplish so much throughout the course of your career. I would love to talk about, let's talk about J5 then. I would love to talk about that. How was that? I would say my first experience with Jurassic 5 was at a time where I was just getting into hip hop. I was not interested in hip hop in high school, and I had an old rollerblade tape because we used to go rollerblading all the time in the late '90s when it was cool. And JU was like one of the tracks on this tape, but there's no internet, there's no nothing. So I remember we had to like legit dig and find like the title of this track on this tape, and then I think I got the CD through like the Columbia House. Like it was like technically that CD probably cost like $87 because I had to get 30 other things I didn't want for just that one CD. But that was my first experience with Jurassic 5, and it was definitely like a defining moment for me because that was a taste of what I would consider like sort of like underground hip hop culture at the time, because it wasn't Wu-Tang, it wasn't on the radio, it wasn't top 40. So what was it like, starting Jurassic 5, what were your goals? Like, what was that experience like around that time, especially sort of that late 90s in West Coast, West Coast hip hop, where Jurassic 5's sound was not what was common at the time.
Well, I skipped ahead in that story earlier. Before we got to the point where we made a record and got that signed, the climate of hip hop in Los Angeles, especially, I would say the West Coast, but Los Angeles especially, was pure gangster rap. And it was pure because it was just a few gangster groups out, and the initial one was NWA. And so they made such a mark in the industry that most major labels, as well as minor labels that were putting out hip hop, wanted an NWA. So there was no real room for cats who were doing like conscious rap or any other style of rap besides gangster rap to bring their demos up and try to get a deal because everybody wanted that instant success. That being said, it alienated a lot of people, a lot of the scene in Los Angeles. And from what I've learned later, by talking to a lot of the dudes on the East Coast and in the South as well, it did the same thing for those regions as well. So in Los Angeles, there was a health food cafe, a health food store on the South Side, in South Central LA. It was on Crenshaw and Exposition, and it was called The Good Life. And this place was like, I had never heard of wheatgrass shots and things like that. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know it was a health food spot, and it was cool. That was in the middle of the hood, so to speak, and it was ran by like a couple of people who were ex-Black Panthers. They were a couple, and this other lady, her name is B Hall, and she became like the face of the people who ran the place. But anyway, they opened the doors to all of the youth who were doing hip hop music and singing and things like that. That wasn't trying to be a part of the gangster scene because once again, it was smack dab in the middle of the hood, where it was like gangs all around us. And some of the gangs would kind of infiltrate the area where they would throw this night, every Thursday night, from 7 to 10. It only cost $3 to get in. The place could only fit like 75 people, but the parking lot could fit like 400 people. So it was like a big party every Thursday night. And sometimes you'd have gangster dudes come over there, but what I noticed is that they would be so amazed at it not being a violent situation that they joined the party too. It'd be all good. But anyway, that place became an open mic spot for anybody who wanted to do something that was uplifting. You couldn't curse. They didn't, condone the gangster mentality. But if you brought some kind of artistic skill with it, then they would let it. As long as you weren't cussing up there, it was all good. But then they had minor rules like you couldn't chew gum because they had this nice wood floor. You couldn't touch the paintings behind you. You know what I'm saying? Things like that. Right? But that place I called my college because it basically honed our skills, not only as performers but as lyricists and stuff. There was some really amazing people in there. The kings of that situation was a group called the Freestyle Fellowship, and I don't know if a lot of people know about those guys, but you do some homework. These guys were amazing, like the top of the food chain, like jazz musicians, but in a hip hop form, so to speak. These guys were amazing. Still to this day, I look up to those brothers. They're a big part of who I am, so to speak. But anyway, we used to do that, and it was all about at one point every Thursday, no matter what, we'd have to make a song during the week so that we could perform it on that Thursday. You know what I'm saying? So it got like that to the point where it made everybody who participated, all of their catalog built, got bigger. A lot of people started to get signed. A lot of people started to, from record labels, started to show up to the place to see new talent. The popularity of the place started to infiltrate TV shows and stuff like Moesha. Yeah, she had, talking about Ray J's sister, Brandy. I couldn't think of her name right now. She had a TV show called Moesha, and in her TV show, they emulated our situation. She had a health food store. That was an open mic spot. It was called The High Life and not The Good Life. And what was cool was some of the dudes from The Good Life ended up being on the TV show because of it. So it was really cool, like, that all of this was like crossing each other, you know what I'm saying? And it provided an opportunity for us to start to be seen again by the industry. So, like I said, a lot of people started to get signed and plucked out of The Good Life. And, you have a lot of famous people who a lot of people know right now, like for instance, there's a group that used to be called the Figures of Speech. It was two girls, a beautiful girls. One of them went on to be a famous movie director. She directed the movie Selma. She directed A Wrinkle in Time. She directed all these movies. But she's a rapper. She's an amazing underground rapper. You know what I'm saying? Her name is Ava DuVernay. So big up to her. It's like people like that. Us, we came out of there. There's a guy called Volume 10 that came out of there. Freestyle Fellowship, definitely. Some of the guys from the Black Eyed Peas, some of the guys from Far Side, all these different people came out of this place. And it motivated us to in the middle 90s to like say, okay, now we've honed our skills enough. Let's try to see if we can get a record deal. And like that's where it fell into one of the guys in the group in our group was working for a label. And that label got his number because they heard our record that we put out, and that was that. But yeah, it was the pursuit of trying to get signed took over our whole mentality. It was like, okay, so now the next step is to get a record deal. And you know, when you in it like that, you're young, you're thinking that is the end of all the problems. But that was just the beginning of our problems for sure. So yeah, it was cool to be able to do it. We got that small record deal with Blunt TBT Records, and we were kind of some of the first dudes on that label with Mike Geronimo, and I think Ja Rule had a group on there called, I forgot what that group was called. Then they had some Miami bass music dude that was on there, but then it was us. That eventually led to us putting together a 5-song EP that we thought would be a better situation to shop as a demo. But we had a friend who was also part of a rap group that was part of The Good Life. Her group had already got signed to Capitol Records and then split up, so they didn't really make it, you know. But she kept putting out records, and she got a distribution deal through a company called New Groove Alliance, which was based in San Francisco. Her deal was 1 single and 1 EP. No, excuse me, 2 singles and 2 EPs, but she only had 1 single and 1 EP. So she asked us, she was like, I see you guys are working. Let's share this deal, create a joint venture thing, and put this stuff out. We was like, you sure? She's like, yeah. I was like, all right, cool. So I drew up the logo, I drew up the names and all of that. And we established a record label called Rumble. And hers was called Pickaninny, so it's called Rumble Pickaninny. And we put out her record, we put out the Blue Jurassic 5 EP. That was like the first initial push, and we didn't realize that it got bigger overseas than it got big here. You know, so in 1997 we were offered a show, our first time to ever leave the country. So we went to England, and there's a place called Folkestone, England. This place is a retirement area, but they have this big old convention center, and they threw this hip hop conference that had every aspect of hip hop and everybody from everywhere in Europe. The big crowd showed up. So we got a chance to perform, and we were performing our EP, and people liked our EP and stuff, but we had that one initial song, that very first song, that got big out there and we didn't know. So when we played that song, the crowd went stupid, and we were like, on stage looking at each other like, dude, do you see this? Like, look at this. Like, so we got on stage to talk to the people, because DJ Newmark brought like 50 mixtapes that he made, the actual cassette tapes he said. And they just went like that, you know what I mean? And people were like, we didn't know that this was you, you know, we never seen your face, and you know, it was that kind of thing. So we was like tripping, like, okay, well, if we don't get the love at home, we should just go where we do get the love, you know what I'm saying? So we started to go out to Europe a lot after that, and we eventually landed a distribution deal out there through a distribution company called Play It Again Sam. They treated us like a record label. It was just a distribution deal, but they gave us money, they gave us video budgets, they would fly us out. It was just crazy. We was like, no, we live in a life, no. But we go home, we go to the grocery store, it's all good. Like, so we were like tripping out. It was really nice, actually. Yeah, it was really nice. So we did a lot. We did a song called Concrete Schoolyards that we did a video for. And it took off over there, like really took off. We won an award for it, all this stuff, no more award, and all this stuff for that song. Meanwhile, we come back home and nobody was really tripping. Me and Cut Chemist started doing another thing with a young friend of ours that we used to know from since he was 12 years old. His name is Will Dog. He's a bass player. And we formed a group called Also Mine. So we started doing that as well at home. And that took off in the States bigger than it took off overseas. So we was just doing back and forth things, and it was crazy for a while. Then it got really crazy because, people want your time and don't want to understand what's going on. It takes your partners to make something like that successful. So all my partners weren't all that cool about it.
Well, that's hard too, right? Because you like you said, you start out young, and then all this unexpected stuff happens, and then there hits a point where everyone's like, "Yo, right now it's my career, right?" And so now you start thinking about the future, and it gets difficult. The crazy thing for me about Ozomatli is I didn't realize at the time necessarily that you were connected through all these different things, and so the Jurassic 5 thing got me, from rollerblading into breaking, basically. My first exposure to breaking was through, rollerblading tapes. And then we get into breaking, and then Freestyle Fellowship, Hot Potato is like B-Boy royalty, classic music. But then Ozomatli, Ava, that song was like you could play it at a B-Boy jam and they'll lose their minds. And it was like years later that I realized you were connected through all these different things. I would love to talk about your musical influences because from Jurassic 5 to Ozomatli, like those are very different sounds. And then you were even involved with is it Galactic? Is a group from New Orleans, right? They have very, very different sounds and influences, right? Like Ava is like super Latin funk, like salsa kind of sound. Like what are you interested in musically when you think about creating something in the projects you've been involved in? Because you've been involved with so many different people.
Well, I think honestly, I have an eclectic view of music due to the fact that I feel like I'm a purist hip hop dude. And hip hop being the mosaic art form, it's made of everything. You know what I'm saying? So if you're not listening to everything and you say no, but I'm all about real hip hop, then I think you're lying. That's how I look at it. You know what I'm saying? You gotta listen to everything because it's made of everything. That being said, me growing up, in the 70s and 80s, my mom, my dad, extensive record collection, and they used to get up in the morning on Sundays and clean up the house and play music. And they didn't care what it was, they just reached for records and play them. And because I was an artist, I used to like to sit there and whatever album they chose, I would kind of DJ for. Which one y'all want next? Boom, I put it on, and I take the album cover, read it, I would try to draw it, and all those kind of things. And I think that's what really got me into a lot of different styles of music because I'm able to connect the visual aspect and a childhood memory to a lot of these songs, you know what I'm saying, and these groups like Earth, Wind and Fire, to Bob Marley, to, I don't know, man, Willie Nelson, I mean, everybody, you know what I'm saying, they liked everything, and I'm grateful for that, you know what I'm saying, so I draw from all of those experiences, for sure. Word.
I think that's tight too, because like you said, hip hop is like this super eclectic, and it's all about take it and flip it too, right? So you should be influenced by something and flip it and make it your own. Let's talk about writing then. Like, you still paint, you still get up. Like, what is that like for you now? What are your influences then? When it comes to writing and painting and doing that, and then how does that in turn maybe come back and influence you, musically? I think something that I noticed is that people within hip hop, if you are multifaceted, right, it makes you better at both things. So if you're not just a b-boy, if you're not just an MC, if you do multiple things, it's back to that being creatively influenced, right? So how does painting, affect you, and how is it different than music, and then also how does it influence your music?
Well, I think me being an artist, like a visual artist, and me paying attention to detail is what spills off in all of the other artistic things that I do, and I think that's what you hear in the music, like all this percussive, technical rap stuff I do. You know what I mean? It's all a mirror of me paying attention to the details and the patience that it takes to pull those details out. You know what I mean? So that's how each one feeds each other. But it's the weirdest thing because if I'm painting a picture, then it's almost like there's a little man inside of me that shuts off the other thing, right? So I can't really bring myself to create a song or what have you. But all these ideas float around my head. So I gotta have like a tape recorder next to me or something while I'm painting them. Because I'm like, oh, All right, cool. You know what I'm saying? So I won't forget, and vice versa. Like when I'm in the studio, like I'm coming up with all these different crazy ideas for something visual. You know what I'm saying? So I think the two feed each other. But I was scared of that at first. I didn't understand how that worked. So I would try to force myself to do both things at the same time, and I would never have the right or the results that I wanted. You know what I mean? So I just like stopped and I let it go, and that's when I started to see it flow. I'm like, oh, this is how it feeds off each other. So I let it come out like that. And but hoping it's straight too far, of course.
No, it's great. I'm learning lots of amazing things about you, so I'm super stoked on it. I want to talk about a couple other things, then we can do some open questions for those that have like super personal questions they want to ask of you. Let's talk about this book then. So let's talk about the book, how that came.